Chapter 22. Their reactions, as reactions went, were quick and efficient. At the same time, Shada had to admit, they were oddly comic to watch. The shock of the unexpected voice behind him sent Calrissian jumping half a meter into the air, his gun hand getting momentarily tangled in his cloak before he could haul his blaster free. The Nogri's blaster, unsurprisingly, was already out and trained on her, with Solo's not very far behind. Card didn't jump nearly as far as Calrissian had, but instead of going for a weapon himself, he merely took a long step to the side to give Solo and the Nogri a clear field of fire. A smart move, but no more than Shada would have expected from someone of his reputation. Counselor Organa Solo, in contrast to the others, didn't move at all. Shada didn't move either. She stood where she was, hands hanging empty at her sides, wondering distantly if the vaunted and probably overrated Nogri combat reflexes would make it more or less likely the guard would overreact to her unexpected appearance by gunning her down. She almost hoped he would. In many ways, it would be the simplest way to end things. But the Nogri didn't fire. Neither did Solo nor Calrissian. And with a vague sort of half regret, Shada knew she wasn't going to get to go out the easy way. It was Organa Solo who broke the brittle silence. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice as serene as her face. "My name is Shada Dukal," Shada said. "I'm not here to hurt any of you." Organa Solo nodded. "I know." Solo threw her a quick sideways glance. "You do?" "My danger sense would have reacted otherwise," Organa Solo told him, "long before she arrived in this room." "What did you do to the guard on the roof?" the Nogri snarled. "I taught him not to be carelessly compassionate," Shada said. "He's not hurt, except possibly his pride." There was a quiet mewing of alien language from a comlink attached to the Nogri's collar. "Garak?" Organa Solo murmured. "He is unhurt," the Nogri said. His blaster was still aimed at Shada, but his eyes seemed fractionally less baleful. "They are freeing him from his restraints." There was a whisper of movement from the corridor behind Shada. She started to turn her head. "Stand where you are," a Nogri voice ordered from behind her. "Lift your arms." Shada did as instructed, holding her arms out to the sides as alien hands flitted across her body, wondering where this other group had been hiding. To have sneaked up behind her in what seemed to be a dead-end corridor. She smiled to herself. Of course. They'd come from the roof, following her route down the safety line and in through the bedroom window. And they'd done so with a speed and efficiency that rivaled the best the Mistral could have offered. Perhaps the Nogri weren't as overrated as she'd thought. A minute later, the probing hands were gone, taking her hip pack and climbing harness with them. "Sit down," the Nogri standing next to Organa Solo ordered, gesturing towards one of the chairs in the conversation circle. "Keep your hands where they can be seen." "Don't you trust your searchers?" Shada asked, sitting down in the indicated chair. "Or your mistress, for that matter. Counselor Organa Solo already told you I wasn't here to hurt anyone." The Nogri's eyes seemed to blaze. "Why are you here?" Organa Solo asked calmly before the alien could speak. "I wanted to talk to you," Shada told her, settling her forearms along the chair's armrests. "This was the only way I could do it." She'd expected an outraged denial, or at the very least a snort of derision, but the other woman merely lifted her eyebrows slightly. Solo was less of a disappointment. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. His blaster, Shada noted, was in his lap, no longer pointed directly at her, but he still had a grip on it. "It means that unless you're someone with power or money, the corridors of the high and mighty are closed to you," Shada told him, not particularly caring whether she sounded bitter or not. "I've been trying to call for the past 3 days, and no one would put me through. So much for the great and wonderful New Republic, friend of all the common people." "So what? You never heard of leaving a message?" Solo growled. "A message that said what?" Shada countered. That a nobody with no credentials or status wanted to talk to a great and glorious High Counselor? It would have been tossed out with the next clearing wipe. You're talking with me now, Organa Solo said mildly. What is it you want to say? Shada focused on her, the carefully rehearsed words seeming to stick in her throat. Words that would slice through her last ties to the Mistral, and her people, and her life. I want to join you, she said, her voice sounding hollow and distant in her ears. I want to join the New Republic. For a painfully long moment, the only sound in the room was the thudding of her own heart in her throat. It was, predictably, Solo who broke the silence. You what? He asked. I want to join the New Republic, Shada repeated. The second time wasn't any easier than the first. I have a number of abilities you'll find useful. Combat and surveillance, escort and security. Why are you asking us about this? Solo interrupted, sounding bewildered. The New Republic has recruitment centers all over Coruscant. I don't think you fully appreciate the situation here, Solo, Card spoke up before Shada could reply. Shada hasn't just walked in off the street, or rather, dangled in off the roof. She's chief bodyguard for our smuggler friend Mazik. A ripple of surprise ran across the others' faces. Former bodyguard, Shada corrected. I resigned 3 weeks ago. Card cocked an eyebrow. Your idea? Shada felt her throat tighten. Not entirely. I don't see what difference it makes where she came from, Solo persisted. We're still none of us in the business of hiring. Han's right, Shada, Organa Solo said, her eyes studying Shada's face with an uncomfortable intensity. Had those Jedi techniques pulled the secret Mistral connection from her mind? There's really nothing we can do for you. I'm not asking for charity, Shada bit out. Frankly, you need me more than I need you, especially with Thrawn on the loose again. What do you know about Thrawn? Solo asked sharply. I was in the back room just now, Shada said. She glanced over at Card, caught the sudden tightening of his expression. Calrissian implied he was back. She looked back at Organa Solo. I also know about the Kamas document, she told the other woman. And I know that the only way you're going to get out of the mess you're in is to get hold of an intact copy of it. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Calrissian throw a significant look at Card, a look the smuggler chief carefully ignored. It would certainly help, Organa Solo acknowledged. What does this have to do with you? You're going to need help, Shada told her. I can supply it. All by yourself? Card murmured. Yes, all by myself, Shada bit out. You've seen me in action. You know what I can do. She looked back at Solo. So do your people, though you might not know it, she said. 19 years ago on Tatooine, I helped you get the technical readout for a prototype component of the second Death Star's super laser. Another ripple of surprise ran through the room. A ripple that, to Shada's own mild surprise, didn't seem to touch Solo himself. Really, he said. Tell us how. A friend and I stole the component from an Imperial research base, she said, trying to read his face. Suddenly, the one who'd been pushing her the most seemed almost to be on her side. It was codenamed the Hammer Tong. We flew the ship it was mounted aboard to Tatooine. What kind of ship? Solo interrupted. Lorinar strike cruiser, Shada said. Heavily modified. The interior had been gutted so the thing would fit inside. We buried the ship in a dune and went to the Mos Eisley Cantina to find a freighter pilot with a ship who would transport a segment of it for us. She gestured to Solo. My partner and I saw you gun down Greedo in there, she said. We were going to try to hire you, but were picked up by the Imperials before we could get over to you. Why? Solo asked. I mean, why did they grab you? Carolee and I had disguised ourselves as Brea and Sene Tanika. Our cam. We'd heard we looked a lot like them, she corrected as smoothly as she could. Now was not the time to mention the Mistral camouflage pre-match files. We didn't know some Moff had put a detain order on them. Anyway, A rebel sympathizer sprung us from our police cell and got us a freighter. We flew out a segment of the super laser component and gave him a droid with a technical readout loaded in. What was the sympathizer's name? Solo asked. Shada had to search her memory. Windward, she said. Ridge Windward. Solo nodded slowly. So that was you, huh? Organa Solo blinked at him. You knew about this? I read Windward's report, Solo told her. It was in the briefing text doc Maydeen gave us before we headed out for Endor. Her wife shook her head. I must have missed it. Well, there were a couple of small differences, Solo said dryly. According to Windward, they'd promised him his own segment of the super laser in return for springing them. There was a sandstorm coming, Shada protested. There was no time to cut another segment and get it loaded. And they didn't exactly give him the technical readout, Solo added. He had to sort of borrow their droid to get it. Shada felt her face warm. Yes, you're right, she admitted. I'd forgotten that. Charming, Calrissian murmured under his breath. Shada threw him a glare. For whatever it's worth, my partners thought we should have killed him rather than let anyone know what we'd done, she bit out. I stopped them from doing that. There was another silence. A hard, tense, discomforting silence. Shada kept her eyes on Organa Solo, trying to read her face. As the ranking political power of the group, it would be up to her to make the final decision. I've got an idea, Calrissian spoke up. She said Card knows what she can do. So why don't we send her with him? Shada looked at Card, her impulsive refusal freezing in her throat. She'd just wasted 12 years with one smuggling group, and she hadn't come to Coruscant just to hook up with another one. But there was something in Card's expression. And just where is Cards going? Solo asked, cocking his head towards the smuggler chief. A special mission, Card said. His eyes were still on Shada, that expression still on his face. Something Calrissian asked me to do. Do we get a hint? Organa Solo asked, a small smile playing around her lips. Card didn't smile back. It's possible there's a copy of the complete Kamas document out there that's not in Imperial hands, he told her. I'm going to see if I can get a hold of it. Solo and Organa Solo exchanged startled glances. Why didn't you tell us this before? Organa Solo demanded, the patient amusement gone from her face. Because up till now, none of this has been any of my business, Card said coolly. Political arguments have nothing to do with me, except insofar as planetary snits and sulkings tend to benefit information dealers. He looked at Calrissian. But now a new factor has been stirred into the mix, one which I've been persuaded can no longer be ignored. Organa Solo hunched her shoulders as if a sudden cold draft had blown across her back. Thrawn. Card nodded soberly. Thrawn. He looked at Shada. And yes, I would be greatly pleased to have Shada's assistance. If she's willing, of course. Shada grimaced, the irony a bitter taste in her mouth. 19 years late, she'd finally made the wrenching decision to shift her allegiance from her own people to the New Republic, only to find that the New Republic didn't want her, and the only one who did was as much an outcast from their great and wonderful new society as she was. Sure, she told Card. Why not? Trust me, Shada. Card gets all his best people this way, Calrissian said dryly. When you get aboard the wild card, ask Mara Jade how she got hired. Something flickered across Card's face. Mara won't be with us, he said. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you tonight, Leia. Mara's come to some kind of accident. Calrissian's sly smile vanished, and the other sat up straighter. What kind of accident? Organa Solo asked. A confusing one, Card said, with a grimace. She and the Starry Eyes tracked one of the unidentified ships your brother saw in the Charon system. Wait a minute, Solo interrupted. What's this about unidentified ships? He and Mara saw it skulking around the Kavrilhu pirates base, Card said. Didn't he send you a report? Yes, but only a very sketchy one, Organa Solo said. He just said he hadn't learned anything from the pirates and that he would give us all the details when he got back to Coruscant. There was nothing about any unidentified ship. He must not wanted to say anything on an open channel, Card said. I've got a copy of his and Mara's records of that sighting, plus the data we took when another of the ships buzzed the errant venture. I'll get copies to you before I leave. Forget the ships a minute, Calrissian put in impatiently. What happened to Mara? The starry ice tracked it to a small world in the Gradillas sector, Card said. Mara went in for a closer look and spotted the fortress, entered a cave for a one-sided conversation with unknown beings, mentioned Skywalker's name in response to something they said or did, and then abruptly went silent. Calrissian's face had gone rigid. You mean she was... No, she wasn't killed, Card hastened to assure him. At least not then. You can hear her breathing on the recording that was pulse transmitted back to the starry ice. And these beings knew Luke? Organa Solo asked, her forehead furrowed. With thought or dread, Shada couldn't tell which. Knew him or knew of him, Card told her. There wasn't enough context for us to tell which. We need to get hold of him right away, Solo said to his wife. See if he can tell us anything. Card cleared his throat self-consciously. Actually, I've already spoken to him. He couldn't shed any light on it either. Organa Solo regarded him suspiciously. And? She prompted. That was the other thing I wanted to tell you, Card said, his urbane air cracking just a bit. He's gone off to find her. Organa Solo's expression didn't change, but suddenly the temperature in that part of the room seemed to drop a few degrees. He's what? She asked, her tone ominous. She's in danger, Leia, Card said. Luke was the only one who could get there fast enough to make a difference. The only one who had a reasonable chance of dealing with whatever the creatures were Mara ran into, and whatever it is up in that fortress. This doesn't just concern Mara, it concerns the entire New Republic. And what? You think this Bothan mess doesn't? Solo growled. He was on his feet now, glaring across the conversation circle at Card. We got 100 little wars simmering out there, half of them using Kamas as an excuse to go in and settle old grudges. We've already emptied the New Republic Diplomatic Corps and Jedi Academy trying to find enough mediators to go around, and we still don't have enough. We need Luke here. I didn't force him to go after her, Card countered, not quite glaring back. He weighed all the factors and made his own decision. Except that he didn't know Thrawn was back, Solo countered. Did he? Let it go, Han, Organa Solo said quietly, reaching up to touch her husband's arm. What's done is done. Card's right. It was Luke's decision to make. He's made it, and we all just have to manage without him until he returns. If it helps, you can consider my service to be in exchange for his, Card said, his mouth still tight. I'm sorry to have brought such bad news. I really thought you'd be more understanding. Solo took a deep breath, exhaled it raggedly. Yeah, he said. Well, when are you heading out? Immediately, Card said, crossing to Shada and offering her a hand. Assuming my new assistant has no errands she has to attend to first. I'm ready whenever you are, Shada told him, ignoring the preferred hand and getting to her feet without assistance. Assuming Counselor Organa Solo's bodyguards are finished sifting through my pack and climbing gear. They are waiting for you by the door, the Nogri beside Organa Solo said gravely. Fine, Card said, nodding to Organa Solo as he moved towards the entrance. Thank you for your hospitality, Leia. I'll contact you if and when I find anything. 2 other things, Card, before you go, Organa Solo said. 3, actually. First, will you need a translator droid for your trip? That's a good point, Card conceded. The organization has several, of course, but none are aboard the wild card at the moment. It won't be too hard to pick one up along the way, though. That'll take extra time, Organa Solo said. If you'd prefer, we could lend you 3PO. Solo made a noise in the back of his throat. Over his stripped gears, of course. It's a very generous offer. Card cocked an eyebrow. It wouldn't have anything to do with the thought that you might be able to get an unbiased report of the trip out of him when we get back, would it? Of course not, Organa Solo said, arching her own eyebrows slightly. I'm hurt you'd even suggest such a thing. Forgive me, Card said. In that case, I accept, with thanks. As Han suggests, we'll want a few minutes to talk with him first, Organa Solo said. We can bring him over to the spaceport when we pick up those spaceship records from you. Second, I wasn't able to tell you this before, but under the circumstances, it's something you may need to know. One of the other data cards the Deveronian found at Mount Tantus was labeled the Hand of Thrawn. Card nodded. Yes, I'd heard. Organa Solo's eyebrows lifted. How did you... Never mind. I don't want to know. My source and I thank you for your discretion, Card said. There's something else you need to know, though. Before Mara went chasing after that unknown ship, we picked up a transmission from it, clearly directed at the errant venture. We haven't yet been able to decipher the message, but it definitely contained Thrawn's name. His full name, not just the core name Thrawn. Solo frowned. I didn't even know he had more name. Most people don't, Card agreed. But Mara did. So did whoever was aboard that ship. What do you think it means? Organa Solo asked. I don't know, Card said. Maybe we'll have some answers when Skywalker and Mara get back. At any rate, I'll add a copy of that recording in with the others. You said there were 3 things. Organa Solo smiled. A smile that was shaded with tension, but a smile nonetheless. May the Force be with you, she said quietly. Almost involuntarily, Shada thought, Card smiled back. And with you, he said. His eyes flicked to Solo and Calrissian. With all of you, he added. Goodbye. Nice speech you made back there, Shada commented as Card lifted the airspeeder off the Arrowwood Tower's pad and turned its nose towards the West Champion field, where the wild card was waiting. A little over-rehearsed, perhaps, but not bad for all that. You're too kind, Card said, looking at her out of the corner of his eye. She was staring straight ahead at the nighttime Coruscant landscape, her face faintly illuminated by the glow from the instrument board. With better light, he decided, her expression would probably still have been impossible to read. May I ask which part of the discourse sounded like a speech to you? That bit about why it had to be Skywalker who went charging off to rescue Mara Jade, she said. You weren't really expecting them to greet that news with shouts of joy, were you? Card shrugged. I didn't expect them to be quite so upset about it either, he said. Of course, to be fair, I didn't know about Thrawn until this evening. Shada shook her head. It's hard to believe he survived. Agreed, Card said. On the other hand, it's equally hard to believe the Empire would pull a dangerous stunt like this purely as a bluff. Either Thrawn's really back, or somebody somewhere has a pure 23 hidden in his vest. Shada seemed to ponder that. Suppose this Thrawn is actually just a clone, she said. Would it be as skilled as the original? I suppose it would depend on how much of his tactical ability was innate and how much was learned, Card considered. And whether or not they used a flash teaching imprint taken from Thrawn's own mind, and how good the pattern was. I just don't know. Because if they have one clone of Thrawn, why not 50, Shada went on. And if they have 50 clones of Thrawn, why not 100 clones of that crazy Dark Jedi Joruus Sabaoth, too? Card winced. That last possibility hadn't even occurred to him. Why not indeed? Shada didn't pick up on his rhetorical question, and a dark silence descended on the airspeeder. Card flew mechanically, not really seeing Coruscant's magnificent horizon-to-horizon lights. Or rather, seeing the total destruction of those lights superimposed on his view. Thrawn had threatened such destruction the last time he attacked the planet. This time he might actually do it. They were descending towards the reassuring bulk of the wildcard when Shada spoke again. So who's this George Cardass we're looking for? With an effort, Card shook off his vision of the circle of Star Destroyers closing in on him. He's someone who used to be in the same business I am, he told her. Probably still is, actually. But not a competitor? She prompted. You were certainly paying attention in there, he complimented her. Incidentally, just out of curiosity, where in the bedroom were you hiding? I didn't notice any place where anyone bigger than a Nogri could have been tucked away. I was on the floor, between the back bed and the wall, she said. A gap like that always looks smaller than it really is. If Cardass wasn't a competitor, what was he? Card threw her a smile. Persistent, too. I like that in my people. Delighted to hear it, she said. If he wasn't a competitor, who was he? Ahead, the wild card's hangar door was sliding open to receive them. Ask me on the way into the exochron system, he told her, assuming we make it that far. Shada snorted under her breath. So what? You're asking me to risk my life on nothing but your word? You don't have to come, Card said mildly. If you want to leave right now, you're free to do so. She looked away from him. Thanks for the permission. I'll stay. The airspeeder settled with a muffled clunk into its slot in the wild card's hangar. As you choose, Card said as he shut down the engines. Out of curiosity, why exactly did you leave Mazik? She twisted her shoulders out of the restraints. Ask me on the way out of the exochron system, she said sardonically. Assuming we make it that far. Without waiting for a response, she popped her door and dropped feet first onto the deck. I'm sure some of us will, Card murmured, watching as she threaded her way between the other vehicles towards the exit. The only question was, which ones? That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.